Well, welcome everybody to the 10th episode of These Lads Are Mental. I'm your host today, Neil. Unfortunately, Gary, my co-host, can't be with us, but I'm joined by the lovely Jim Breen, who's live in Australia, right?
Yes, good morning. Good morning from 9 o'clock in the morning here in Australia.
Yeah, it's the same here. Well, the sun is up, so can't complain. It's winter, but I'm based up in Bangalore, Byron Bay, so it's still pretty warm, especially for two Irishmen. I think people are on the beach on the weekend, so that'll put it into perspective for you. We're a long way from home, eh?
Yeah, for sure.
Jim, normally with the intros, I like to hand it over to the guest because I looked at your bio, it was quite extensive. So if you could give us maybe a line or two on who you are, where you come from, and how you've been, I suppose, linked to the whole mental health topic.
Sure. So who am I? I guess by profession, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a social entrepreneur. By sporting category, I'm an oarsman, I'm a runner, swimmer, triathlete, cyclist. Not great at any of them, but love them all. Irish, grew up in Galway. My main home is now Kerry, but I'm spending a lot more time in Galway these days. I'm the founder of a company called PulseLearning. We're a global leader in learning. Our clients are around the globe. We were set up in 1999, and I'm also the founder of I Am Here, which is a mental health and wellbeing movement. So we have about 1 million people we look after with our clients across 6 continents. There's 104 countries, 14 languages. I was the founder of Cycle Against Suicide, which is a charity who's up on the island of Ireland. I'm also the founder of the Entrepreneur Experience, which is supported by Access Bacon non-for-profit, which supports startups in both the for-profit and non-for-profit environment. I'm 56, male, and Taurus.
Taurus, you beat me too. I was like, what's one thing that people maybe don't know about you? I'm a Scorpio, so I tend to have a sting in me if I get pushed too much. Wow, well, what a resume. I mean, you seem to have had it and still having a fledgling career, both here in Australia and across the world by all accounts. And if we were to dive into, so obviously these lads that are mental is about mental health and bringing awareness to the topic yourself. And you've obviously built quite a successful business or businesses. And I know that you were approached in the past life from the secret millionaire. So, I know that you've got that serious business acumen. And I watched in my research before we chatted today about how was that the moment that really started to bring mental health to the fore for you? I think you'd mentioned that maybe a year or two before that period that you started to kind of feel the pull of depression. Was there a moment, you have a very active life from what you just said. How did you come to this position of maybe there's something not right going on here?
So but when you say, Neil, that I have a successful career, and I accept that, right? I accept it, but it doesn't feel like that. It never feels like that. I guess part of it is the entrepreneur in you that there's just genuinely, and it's neither good nor bad. It's just the way it is. There's no real rear view mirror in terms of looking at what you've done so far and then saying you're successful. All you really do as an entrepreneur is you're looking at what you're doing this minute and what you're looking to achieve. And that never feels successful. It feels that you're on the cusp of something exciting and interesting breakthrough. And whether it's entrepreneurial or social entrepreneurial, the it's true, and I accept, and I'm not going to debate it. There's success there, but it doesn't feel like that. Just to be kind of clear. And again, I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing. It's just a thing. Whereas in other things that you might have achieved in your life, you can say, yeah, that was a failure or a success, or it was average. But in terms of sort of the when you're making shit happen, and by shit I mean some highly impactful things. When you're making shit happen, it's very hard to have a scoreboard on it, right?
Yeah.
And if it is a scoreboard, it's more like a hurling scoreboard than a soccer scoreboard. It changes fast. You can be 6 points ahead and then you're 2 goals down very fast. In terms of kind of when was the moment, I think there's kind of two sets of, and again, this is just my experience, just kind of two sets of revelation. One is the kind of the acceptance that you're unwell, you're different, you're sick, you're ill, which, I knew as a 4-year-old. And then there's an acceptance which is accompanied by language, and you're able to describe what that feels. And I'm very lucky that I got to the second revelation, because depending on what the challenge is in life, you might not be able to articulate what that is, and that locked inness is not as uncommon as you think. So as a 4-year-old, like, the figure 8 used to scare me, because infinity scared me, and a bit of a strange thought for a 4-year-old to have, but like, that idea that there was a foreverness, and like even scared to look up in the sky and see the stars because it seemed to be too big. And then there was other maybe gifts around that you also couldn't describe or articulate. So it's never all binary, it's not generally binary, because it never is also binary. So it's not generally binary, it's not you're well or you're unwell, you're ill. And even labels, like I'm happy to talk about, diagnostics and some of the challenges with diagnosis, but labels have never been a help to me. They've never been a support, they've never been an aid. But language has been able to describe. It's like even the idea that we say very, very clearly with an I'm here. And I'm here is based on a very simple belief that it's okay not to feel okay, and a behavior that it's absolutely okay to ask for help. But it's okay not to feel okay. I don't believe it's okay not to be okay. I think it's shit not to be okay. And I would think that, most of the time the challenge is how we're feeling, and that's the part that we can really target and address. So right now I'm feeling 8.5 or 9 out of 10, which is great. And I work at that, and it's not easy to get there, but it's that moment, you're asking for, when did I know? It really is a moment of being able to articulate it versus when you know it.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it's funny you mentioned though that, labels aren't good for you. Whereas, I think a lot of your story I can relate to, and I'm sure a lot of people can as well. But for me, the label kind of helped initially anyway, because when I was growing up, there was a lot of that same feeling a certain way and not knowing why. And then that used to manifest in things like being sulky, being short with people, pulling away. And it took me a long, long time to realize that what was probably just going on was a bit of, well, I kind of was aware of my own depression from the early age as well, maybe more towards 10, 11, not quite 4. I think that's a world record in terms of awareness. So that's another really interesting point. But then the label of like, maybe this is just like a mental health condition. It's not you. It's not, you're not defined by these things. And I do remember my mum asking me, I'd be in bed and not wanting to get out of bed and saying like, how are you feeling and what's, those were the early days for me. So I think, yeah, like things like imposter syndrome. And it's the same as what you were saying with entrepreneurship. When are you content? When do you get that moment to go, I've made it, And I remember speaking to my psychologist many years ago when he asked me that question, where I said, I'll feel like that when I'm 80 and all the grandkids are running around. And he said, are you going to wait till you're 80 until you're content? Like, why aren't you content right now? Like, look at the life you have, where you live, the lifestyle. And that was a real big moment for me, thinking, well, okay, I can't let this just like run by, and before I know it, I'll be 80, that kind of way.
Yeah. A friend of mine did some research here in Australia recently, and he asked a cohort of, 60 and 70-year-olds, what would be the advice they'd give to their 30-year-old, 40-year-old self? And the advice was, you're enough.
Yeah.
And they asked sort of 40, 50-year-olds, what would be the advice you'd give to your 20-year-old, 30-year-old self? And their advice was, enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
And but it's all like it's all relative to where you are in any point in time. So ultimately, like for me, the reason that a label isn't particularly helpful is it's like it's like the headline. It's not the story. And the story is what's important. So when I'm in a position to be able to help other people, I'm much more interested in their story than in their label, than in their diagnostic headline. And I think that's where we as humans can, without a qualification, can be very helpful to each other, because if we do three things, if we show you care, which simply builds a contract of trust, and then if we ask the question and listen, like really listen, like there's four stages of listening. The first stage of listening is to beat or compete. The way I describe it is nobody's ever seen a small rat. My rat is bigger than your rat. We always listen in that way. We beat or compete. The second way we listen is we solve or advise. So as soon as somebody tells me something, I want to solve or advise, but I might be solving or advising the wrong thing. So stop, keep listening. And then the third way we listen, which is much better, is we listen to understand. And again, keep listening, because beyond even understanding, you're allowing the other person in a completely compassionate way, in a completely trusting, accepting way, talk themselves and articulate for themselves their own story. So show you care, ask the question and listen, and then finally call for help. And those three things require us to be able to articulate our story, and they require people to listen to that story. And that's why it's not that labels are irrelevant, it's that they're not the point of use. The point of use is the story. And if we're lucky enough that somebody will share their story with us, then that's a powerful thing.
I love that. And as Irish people, like we love storytelling as well, right? And we're often tipped as being the speakers, maybe not so much sometimes as the listeners, but that is the hard part. You nailed on that hard part, right? Because that came up in a previous episode where we had a psychotherapist on, and it's hard sometimes when we do the podcast with three talking heads, because you say something and we went through this live on the podcast, and all you're thinking about rather than listening to what you're saying is what I'm going to say next and what my question is next, and you're actually not truly listening. And I know that often if someone is really struggling, and particularly if you can relate to them and they give you that story, you want to give some kind of advice to try and help them. But that sometimes is the last thing that they need. You don't need someone to tell you what you're doing wrong or what you can't do. You've heard it all before. So I think, and I've spoken before about the Are You Okay Day that's great in theory. And I think they brought in last year, Are You Really Okay? Which is, a good step forward. But yourself, especially as Irish people, if you ask people, are you okay? Regardless of what actually is going on, 9 times out of 10, they'll say, I'm fine. Yeah, great. Yeah, how are you? Good. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, say yeah, bye. And there was a great ad that was done by Brighton and Hove Albion, the soccer club. You might have seen it. It's two mates who go to a footy game in England, and he's all, yeah, cheering and doing all that. And at the very end, his mate goes, mate, is everything all right? And it cracked the egg, and he goes, no, not really, I'm struggling. And then the video ends and they go off to chat about it a bit more. And that's the magic sauce, right? And like, it's a good segue into I'm Here. That's obviously where I Am Here is built around. Have you felt that part the hardest part, to get people to really dive deep into someone's story?
No,
No. Oh, wow. Okay.
no, because again, we're asking the wrong question. Like, for example, asking somebody, are you okay, is a greeting. But if you say, hey, how are you feeling? Scale of 1 to 10, and it can't be 7. That's a different question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And if you say to somebody, hey, you know what? I'm not a bad storyteller, but I'm a great story listener. What's your story?
Yeah, well, that seems so simple, but like I don't think I've had anyone ever say by my parents like, "How are you feeling?"
Yeah. And that's the key. Like, it's okay not to feel okay. It's not okay not to be okay. It's shit not to be okay. It's okay not to feel okay. And it's absolutely you could ask for help. And I will, from an I'm here perspective, we say you need courage, right? And Mandela describes courage as the victory of bravery over fear. So it takes courage to really step in and ask somebody how they're feeling and listen. That's the first thing. It takes courage. But it also takes confidence. It takes confidence to know that by me asking that question in a confident way, I know that I don't need to be able to answer all the questions. I don't need to be able to solve or advise. I don't need to become a doctor or therapist. I just need to have confidence that I'm good in asking that question. And there are ways to do that. So, for example, we say to build courage and confidence, one of the things we would encourage people to do is learn how to do a self-check. So, for example, if you were to spot that I'm maybe not feeling okay or you're concerned about me, the first thing you might say is, well, let me just check in on myself first. So how am I feeling first? How am I feeling? And if you want help with that, task yourself, you say, well, how am I feeling emotionally? How am I feeling physically? How am I feeling spiritually? How am I feeling socially? How am I feeling financially? How am I feeling from a work and career perspective? And then the second question you ask is really important. You say, can I be my own observer? So during this conversation, can I be my own observer? A good friend of mine once said to me, you'll never resolve an argument within an argument. You've never had a husband and wife, been arguing with each other, and all of a sudden the husband says, you know what, you're right. It's
Yes.
never happened.
That's never happened in my life.
It's never happened. And then the third question is, do I need any help or support before I union? So by asking those three questions, which we call the self-check, how am I feeling? Can I be my own observer? Do I need any help or support? That gives us courage and confidence. So that's the first part. And then the second part is, if you were to lean in and check in on me, you do it with compassion, which is a desire to act to relieve the suffering in me, but without taking it on yourself. That's really important. That second part is really important. You do it listening, which we talked about the 4 levels. You do it with empathy, and empathy is a skill, right? And empathy is not. People often say that empathy is about understanding how somebody else feels. Well, I don't understand how I feel myself half the time, so how could I possibly understand how somebody else feels? But empathy is about seeing it from the other person's perspective. But Neil, more importantly, it's trying to understand what's their perception of what's going to happen. And then with acceptance, which is basically just to avoid all judgment, which is really hard, like really, really hard. So whatever's been said, whatever's been spoken at me, I need to just really accept it, just accept it, and make sure that the person is completely accepted. And then finally, I got to do it as my real self. I can't do it as anybody else. I can't do it wearing anybody else's clothes. I was on the phone this morning, and somebody was in trouble, and they said to me, which was a compliment, and I take it as a compliment. I said, I really like talking with you. I feel listened to, and when you do talk, I like your accent. Well, good news is it's the only accent I have. Like, I can't put on an accent. I can't fake that. So being your real self is so important. So we say courage, confidence, and then clear. So compassion, listening, empathy, acceptance, and being your real self. And if you are interested in practicing those, then it's not hard. You ask somebody how they feel with courage, with confidence, with the clear skills. 99 times out of 100, they'll tell you. And if they don't tell you, at least they've got a sense that they're cared for, which I'm a bit odd, Neil. You probably have figured that out by now. But last night I went to a chiropractor in Manly here in Sydney, and it's my second session with her. There's nothing wrong, just preventative stuff. And at the end of it, she said, do you mind if I bring my husband and daughter in to have a chat with you? I said, sure. So she brought her 11-year-old daughter in, and her husband was originally from Austria. And her daughter had just done a leadership course. I said, hey, could you teach me something about leadership? And the 11-year-old immediately taught me 2 really cool things about leadership. And I was listening, and when we finished, the father said, again in a loving way, he said, she did that course 2 days ago, and none of us had asked her to teach us what she learned. I've learned a lot about leadership from my 11-year-old daughter just there. And that doesn't require any qualification, right? So this idea that it's too hard for people to share how they're feeling, no, we're just not asking the question with real compassion.
You think that we've been coming at this a little bit wrong then? Because I totally agree in the sense of we've spoken about this before on episodes around the importance of not so much you being aware, but everyone around you. So regardless of whether you have a mental health condition yourself, it's that circle around you. Because we talk about the signs, and I've heard you speak about that as well. How having your check, yourself first is hugely important. But often it's the person in your, like my theory is if you tell people you have whatever it is you have, at least those people around you are now aware. They can start seeing signs almost as quickly as you can. Oh, Neil's been a bit short with me. He hasn't come out as much. Maybe he's drinking alcohol more than he usually does. Do you think it's more about empowering all humans, let's say, around being aware rather than focusing solely on the person who might be struggling with, say, depression?
Well, so let me answer that question slightly differently. I believe that it's not 1 in 4. It's 100 people out of 100 people at some stage or other are going to need help with something. Not even at some stage. Every week, every month, every year. It's not even like you have to wait a lifetime. I haven't met anybody yet who doesn't need some help in some way. And it could even be like, we talk about conditions and illnesses, but it's bereavement. It's things that happen to us in life. So I think it's not about only limited to those people who need help, because that in itself is everybody. So the whole thing is, if we all can believe it's okay not to feel okay, and if we all can behave in a way where it's absolutely okay to ask for help. And I met 40,000 students a year in cycling against suicide, and it was my favorite part going into schools. And I would say, and you go into a boys' school, like, I can picture like one of the boys' schools in Clonmel. And I'd been in the morning the Loretto Clonmel, and then you go across to so you go from the girls' school to the boys' school. And girls' schools is different from boys' schools, and quiet is different and city is different from country, and small is different from big. And the integrated schools in Northern Ireland are different from the Catholic schools, your private schools. They're all different. But one thing is common is you go in there, and if you can get people's attention in about 20 seconds, and you can get them to believe in your authenticity, your realness. And then you say, hey, do you think we could get everybody to believe it's okay not to feel okay? Everybody, like in that time we used to say in the whole island of Ireland, 6 million of us. And, John, the cynical 16, 17-year-old boys, girls would say, yeah, why not? I've got 2 brothers and a sister, parents, uncle, my aunt. Yeah, I'm part of the hurling club. I'm part of the rugby club. I can tell everybody there. Yeah, we can make sure everybody knows it's okay not to feel okay, and it's absolutely a test for help. And you go, okay, what would that taste like? What would it smell like? What would it feel like? And it's amazing what people come back with, because sometimes, like for me, it smells like Christmas cake. It feels like my mother's Christmas cake, but it also feels safe, and that idea that we should have only a certain number of people feeling safe. I could never understand that. I could never understand why you would ever limit it to only one cohort of people, because we all need to feel safe at some stage.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, physical health is fairly black and white. You go to the gym, you do cardio, you train to be well, but we don't tend to look at the brain or our mental health in that capacity either, right? It's kind of like, well, why can't we go to a gym for that kind of thing or get support there, which is often, I find missed. And you talked about people, suffering, let's say, in silence. And it's not always the case. I'm very careful to say this, but like often, like I lost a friend who took his own life and no one ever knew he was struggling, never communicated. And by all accounts was the coolest man in town, like he had everything that you would look for. So yeah, that's the danger. If we don't create that safe society where people can open up and say, I'm actually not doing okay, you know, something can happen that, which can obviously, take someone from this planet, which is not what we want to do, but do you feel like you mentioned school kids. Do you think that's the kind of answer to this in terms of You know, when I think about my story, it took me to my mid 30s before I was able to really tackle it head on and really dive deep into my own, you know, awareness and health and well-being and so forth. But I know through a lot of the work that we've done with Batir, which works with mental health with the youth under 18-year-olds, that 75% of mental health conditions manifest before you even turn 18. Is the key getting into that, you know, school environment before they turn adolescents, to be able to teach them that at an early age so that it doesn't become a problem down the line?
So maybe two answers, if I may. So the first thing is, thank you for sharing about your friend who took his life. And may I ask just his first name?
Kieran.
Kieran. So I'm really sorry to hear about Kieran. One of the things that we do is we speak to the relationship we had with the person who's died by suicide. So my father, my friend, my uncle, my partner, my son. One thing is that we can do is we can say, would you mind telling me your friend's name? I was in a school in Donegal town, and at the end of the talk, we had Niall Brezzy there that day. We had Ross Purcell. It was an amazing presentation. The students were great. There's about 1,000 cyclists. So it was an amazing event. But at the very end of it, there was a guy coming from the outside. He just had seen this event was on, and he'd walked in, which was great because we always welcomed walk-ins. And he'd asked the deputy principal, could he have a word with me before I left? And absolutely fine. So the cycle went off, and I'd hang around to say thank you to the different people, and then I joined the cycle and met him, and he said, I really appreciate this space that's been created today. He said my father died by suicide in 1978. And I said, thank you for sharing. Can you tell me what's your father's name? He said, my father's name is Porg. I'm Porg, and my father was Porg. I said, I'm really, really sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing. He said, no, you don't get it. You don't understand. He said, my father, Porg, died by suicide in 1978. And that's the first time I've said it.
Wow.
And that has got huge power. And that man left that day in a different place, but I also left in a different place.
Yeah.
So the reason I ask about your friend's name, Kieran's name, is because yes, it's great to get in early, with young people. Absolutely, 100%. That's true. But the counter truth is, if the best time to plant an oak tree is 30 years ago, the second best time is today. So no matter what age people are, we can lean in, we can help, we can support. And again, within I Am Here, a lot of our clients, like I'm here, Super Retail Group today, 80% of their team members are under 26. And we have huge buy-in to I Am Here at Super Retail Group. So they've got Rebel Sport and Super Cheap Auto and BCF and a number of brands. So it's great getting into young people, but it's not exclusive. We can't rule out people who are old, like 56, or even older or younger. Yeah. So and I say that very conscious that culturally, you got to be aware there's different acceptance levels for different levels of conversation. And I would also say that, one thing is that I would encourage men about is, we're all men. You got to learn how to tell people how you feel. You got to learn how to say what you're feeling. You got to learn how to speak up. Maybe, but if I could give a kind of maybe a view that's different than most. When I meet with men, I say, maybe it's not all about talking, maybe it's about being. Can you be a good friend? Can you be a great story listener, even if you're not a great storyteller? Would you be there?
It's funny you mentioned that because I saw this the other day. I can't remember the Irish word for it, but there's an actual Irish word for someone just rocking up to your house unannounced just to call in. And I'm doing that growing up in Ireland all the time. I'm just looking at my granny and grandparents lived in the same estate as me, so I was only ever like a 60-second walk away.
Yeah.
There's always someone calling in unannounced.
Yeah.
That doesn't really tend to happen anymore, does it? Like, everyone always has to message you first. Are you home? Are you in? You don't get the random talks. And yeah, I love that, the ability to just be there, because I wanted to ask you as well, asking someone's name. I think that's a really nice touch, particularly if we've lost somebody. But when you look at the public forum, let's just say, like if someone passes by taking their own life, they don't say that anywhere online or in the news, in the media, which I also understand, right? You don't want to glorify, or for lack of a better word, or give it a pedestal, as it were, which I understand. But also, I don't think that does any good, in my opinion. Where they say, they'll just say Neil, died yesterday, and they won't give any reason. So you kind of know that they've probably taken their own life, but they don't say. And for me, that always feels like it's brushing the issue under the carpet. And rather than taking it as an opportunity for someone to go, let's not let it get to this, and spark more of that positivity. Would you agree with that sentiment? Or do you think how we communicate that part of this as an issue publicly, are we doing it right, or are we miles off still?
I think the one thing I think we need to challenge. This is a really hard one, and I say this with deep sensitivity. The idea that there are never any signs. I think we need to really challenge that. My view, and the evidence would suggest that the signs are there, and they may not be the strongest signs, and often it's like, if you can picture Neil, somebody who's battling with addiction, the people that they can hide that best from are the people that they love the most.
Oh yeah, yeah. Even there's alcoholism with my family. A lot of my friends didn't even know. I told them when I was in my mid-30s, when we were on a stag do in Amsterdam, and they were all in shock
Yeah.
in the hotel room when I told them. I was like, "Geez, it's like maybe we all hit it very, very well." Okay, I was going to ask so quickly as well. Do you have a couple of quick examples if someone is listening in on some maybe casebook signs that you should be aware of, like from you looking at somebody else in your family? Or
Yeah. So I give you an example, absolutely, and I'll go one step further.
yeah,
So the thing you're looking out for is change. Yeah. And remember, it's only an indicator. So I used to have a Volkswagen Passat, and from the day I bought the Volkswagen Passat, the engine light was on. And every service I'd say, is there any chance you could fix that engine light? Because the indicator is flawed. And they would reset it, and I'd be driving out of the garage and it would come back on again.
yeah,
And one day there was a problem with the engine, but I didn't know to act because the indicator was on all the time. And so indicators can be false indicators, they can be, all those, but the indicator is change. So, and all you need to do is check the indicator. That's it. Just check the indicator. So it's not about the person who's loud becoming quiet. It could be the person who's quiet becoming louder. It could be the person who's more introverted becoming more extrovert. So which one first change? That's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing I'd say is, we have a course, the I'm Here Tribe Members course, and we'll make it available to all your listeners if they want. And we'll create a link that they can just access it. And in that, it talks about not only how you notice that somebody might not be feeling okay, but what you do next. So, that show you care action, and the courage, the confidence, compassion, listening, empathy, acceptance, and being real. Because noticing the indicator is of no benefit. It's like they say in Kerry, you can't plow a field by turning it over in your mind. Just because you notice that something might not be right, that's not enough. We have to act on that. And the act requires courage, confidence, and clear skills. So I'm very happy that we share the I'm Here to Try Members class. And anybody who's listening in, if they're interested, give it to them for free.
I love that, and I think that's a really big takeout for me about we need to act, because I feel often with mental health, which in many ways is part of its evolution, and it's a good thing that we are talking about it more, which I think is great. It was a bit like me when I went to my psychologist. it had a purpose at that stage for me to start talking about this, which is all well and good. But then it got to a point where I was like, I'm sick of talking about it, and I need to kind of compartmentalize some of this stuff. And I think that's where mental health maybe needs to go. Rather than just talking about it all the time, we need to drive a little bit more action. And that's a lovely segue into your I am here, because I did want to touch on the corporate business work life, because I think we said off camera that whilst there is a lot of good going on with mental health, the environment, the society that we live in is just going at an existential pace, always connected, internet, Wi-Fi, VPNs, working, post-COVID, the rules of 9 to 5 seems to have just gone out the window. People ring me from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m., 7 days a week. And if you don't answer it, you lose a sale. Like, it's relentless, I find. Are you seeing that in the corporate landscape right now? Are things like, loneliness, disconnection, stress, financial connection, disconnection, are they getting worse? Are you finding through the work you're doing?
So, if you'll allow me, I believe that there's truths and counter-truths. So let's say everything you said is true, but if I can give you a counter-truth, counter-truth is we've also never been more well off, right? We've never had as much safety around us. Like, I grew up in Ireland in the 70s and 80s when there was a war going on in Northern Ireland. Thankfully, there's no war going on today. There are wars in the world, but there are less wars now than ever before, which is not what you'd think if you're listening to the media. So I would say, yes, there are Nazi pressures on us, and yes, it can seem unrelenting. But the counter truth is we've never had more safety. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, and again, I say this carefully and sensitively, if you think that's pressure, right, retire in the morning and have nothing to do and feel the pressure of that.
Yeah.
So what's really important is we find purpose. And once you find purpose, two things happen. Number one is the unnecessary stuff we see more perspective and it calms down. And the other side is that when we are in a quiet place, we can still understand our purpose. Now, that's not easily done. But there's a beautiful story of the Native American chief, and he's talking to his grandson, and he's telling the story about the wolf of hope and the wolf of despair, and they're about to come to battle. And he tells this beautiful story of the preparation that the wolf of despair had and the preparation that the wolf of hope had. And he finishes the story, and his grandson says, "So, Grandpa, which wolf won?" And the grandfather says, "Whichever one you feed the most." And that was told at a time where a lot of the tribes had just lost their land. And when they lost their land, they lost their purpose. So, yes, it's down to connection and people being, pulled out from 100 more directions. That's true. I think the greater truth is we're lacking in purpose, and if you can today find ways to be, even in a small way, just nudge that what you're doing is more purposeful, then all of a sudden the noise starts to quieten.
Yeah.
And the gaps, the silence become more valuable because now I can serve my purpose. Like I love doing the Camino. It's my favorite thing to do. I don't go to Bali or places like that. I do the Camino. And the reason I do the Camino is because there's a degree of reflection, but movement. And I remember I did it a couple of months ago, and I ended up staying one night in a convent. With, I was the only person there with all these nuns, and I don't have religion, so but I loved their simple sense of purpose and the calmness that came with it. And it's they have phones as well, they have stuff to do and they have jobs to do and they have charities to run and they have charitable acts to do. They have full lives, right? But there's a calmness. And when they sit and they pray, there's a calmness and there's a purpose to that too. And I just thought, for where we are in the world, finding a sense of purpose is a really important, difficult, challenging, complex, but a really important part of us creating a world of more compassionate connection.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, there's, you know, if you look at the the blue zones of the world, you know, they talk about that purpose being one of the key pillars. You know, there's a bit of diet and connectivity and, well, having a purpose, whether that could be gardening, you know, it doesn't have to be something, as you said, that's highfalutin. And I think it's called ikigai, I think is in Japanese culture. So yeah, having a purpose is really, really key to you being happy. And I can totally resonate with that. And, you know, I was also thinking when you were talking there about the wolf analogy that, you know, I have anxiety, and like I kind of flipped anxiety on its head, you know, through my journey around, you know, well, I've got to do a big talk or a keynote, I've got anxiety. But they did a lot of research on what anxiety looks like from a neural point of view, and it's the exact same as you being excitement. There's no way to distinguish between anxiety and excitement in your brain pathways, which, you know, really sings home to that like it's how you see it and how you take it and utilize it. And I've started to see mental health more like a superpower. You know, we all have our traumas, we all have our thing. Rather than being hung up on it and playing the victim, you could turn it into a superpower and go, well, that's made me who I am, and here's what I'm going to do with it. And you've obviously done that very well with, um, you know, the pulse training, and I am there, I am here. And I did want to ask you one follow-up question to that though. Sometimes I found, in my own personal point of view, my radar is off. So you go down through this exploratory story and your journey, and you know this about yourself and so forth. What I found hard sometimes, and maybe if you have any advice on this, is my radar off? Is this me being anxious, disconnected, or is it justified because something has happened? Am I working too hard? Because one of the things I noticed, a similarity between you and me was, you know, you said you do triathlons and you do cycling and you do a whole raft of things, which is the same as me. You know, I was a semi-professional soccer player. I do runs, I go to the gym, I have the podcast. Like, I always find that like it kind of gives me peace to be busy, but also at the same time, is that just me shirking away from, as you said, sitting in the moment and just letting things be, which I think for most people would scare the living daylights out of us if we actually did do that. How do we manage that radar? How do we know? Are we? Because I often think about this even with fashion. You know, I love fashion and clothes, but then I'm also very self-conscious. I'm like, is this me being insecure that I need to buy something to look good? Or is this me just feeling like I want to look good? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'll give you a view on it. So for me, do you remember I talked about that self-check earlier? So the first question is, how am I feeling? And the second question is, can I be my own observer? And the third question is, do I need any help or support? So I practice that self-check a lot, right? It's become part of just the norm. I'll use it before I join a podcast, before we went live. How am I feeling? I'm feeling good. I'm ready for this. I'm calm. There's a drilling going on in the background. Doesn't bother me. Yeah, feeling good. Feeling ready. Feeling energized. Feeling tuned in. Can I be my own observer? Yeah, I believe I can keep a good eye on myself. Do I need any help or support? Yes. I need to go to the bathroom. Okay, we go to the bathroom, do a little check, come back. Now, when we find ourselves that our perception is off or our perspective is off, so either what's coming at us is off or what we're looking at is off, all we go is, that's interesting. Just that's interesting. Because there's a beautiful line by Edith Eger, and her line is, Edith Eger is an Auschwitz survivor. She only passed away a couple of months ago. And she had a number of books, but one of her beautiful books is called The Gift. And she's a line in it and it says, trauma has no hierarchy. What she means by that is, she might see a client in the morning and they've just got a diagnosis of a, serious disease or illness, and they're upset. And then that afternoon, she'll see another client and they've got a brand new Cadillac that's arrived, but the interior is the wrong color and they're upset. And it's not that one upset is greater than the other. So when we are looking at things and we feel off about them, what's really important there is just go, that's interesting. So am I seeing it in perspective? Am I seeing it with the right perception? Or are I getting a disproportionate view to this? And all you're doing is asking the question. You don't even need to get the right answer. Because if I'm choosing this beautiful black top because I want to look good, and maybe I've already got 15 other black tops, I'm asking myself the question, I'm interested in it, I still make the purchase, I feel calm about it, good. It's the compulsion. It's the absence of the space between stimulus and choice. That's the problem. If you can create a pause before the stimulus and you choose your action, you're golden. It doesn't mean your choice is right. It just means you're taking that choice after implementing a pause. So one of the things we talk about with Remain here is, can you get really good? And by the way, a pause can be like a 20-minute yoga session or a 20-minute meditation. We don't have time for that. Sometimes it's a breath. So I'll give you an example. I breathe in. And as I do, I'm thinking, how am I feeling? I hold my breath and I go, can I be my own observer? I breathe out and I go, do I need any help or support? That one breath has got me out of, Neil, a whole load of trouble. And not taking that breath has got me into a whole load of trouble. So it's not about the choice being right. It's about making sure that we're creating that gap for the pause or the consideration. So we're not acting on the stimulus, we're acting on our choice. So between stimulus and response. And the more you practice it, the bigger that choice gap becomes and the more you can fit into it.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. That's the big aha for me, this, because yeah, like I listen a lot to Alan Watts, and he talks about, was it the Atma, the higher self and the watcher. I think you can watch yourself, but then who watches the watcher? Who watch, and then you can end up in this like perpetuity. Well, Jim, that's been so inspiring to listen to your story. There's a lot of nuggets, a lot of takeaways there, even for myself, and I'm sure for the listeners. And thanks for the note about sharing some of your resources after. Thanks for joining us. How do people learn more about you if they want to get in touch with you offline?
Yeah, Jim.Breen on Insta, LinkedIn profile we can put in the show notes as well. Yeah, that's
You already answered. We do a quick fire question, but you already answered me. You said you're 8.5 out of 10. That's amazing. Out of 10, where do you think we are globally in terms of mental health support?
the support isn't actually the problem. I know that's I might come back and talk about that more. The problem is the diagnosis of the issues.
Okay, great. And if you could recommend one thing for people to do in their day to feel better, see, I've learned, what would you recommend?
I would say sleep. But sleep doesn't matter unless you think about what's going to help you get to sleep. So for me, it's avoidance of alcohol. And for that to happen, it's about thinking about it the morning when I get up.
Love it. Jim, thank you so much for the yarn. I really appreciate it. I know you're a Galway man, so I'm lucky to carry where you live, up the Mayo.
Thank you.